This chapter talks about the economic way of thinking. It introduces us to how economists think and how they observe the real world and make policy prescriptions. This chapter also introduces us to two very powerful and useful models that economists use in understanding how the world works. Economists typically play two roles in the society. The first role that they play is that of a scientist. Like a scientist, economists try to explain how the world works. In this role, they follow the scientific method of inquiry. This method has several steps. The first step is to observe a phenomenon in the world, then to postulate a theory as to how that phenomenon works, and then collect data and see if data validates that theory or not. If the data does not validate the theory, then you need to refine your theory to better explain the real world. The second role which economists play is that of a policy advisor. They observe how the world works and then they try to postulate policies which can help improve some of the outcomes that are observed in the world. First, we'll talk about the role of economist as a scientist. Now, the real world is very complex, and it's very difficult to understand all the various interactions that go about. However, this does not prevent us from studying certain key facets of how the world works. We can make simplifying assumptions and then focus our attention to the question at hand. For instance, when economists study about international trade, a simplifying assumption they often make is that the world consists of two countries and they produce two goods. Now, this assumption is very unrealistic, but as we'll see, this does help us derive certain key results, and these insights or results can be very useful in broader generalizations when we study the world consisting of several countries producing thousands of goods. To study economic issues, economists make use of what we call models. These models are a highly simplified presentation of a fairly complicated reality. In this chapter, we'll talk about two such models and see how these models can help us understand how the world works. The first model that we'll talk about is called the circular flow of income. This is a visual model which will show how goods and services, resources, and money flows among the various sectors of the economy. Now, the economy consists of firms, households, governments, and international countries. However, to keep things simple, we'll assume that the world consists of only two agents: households and firms. Now, in the real world, we encounter three different kinds of markets. Markets for goods and services that we buy and consume. Markets for factors of production, and I'll explain this term later. And the financial market. But let's assume that there are just two markets: goods and services, and the factors of production. The factors of production are the resources that the economy uses to produce goods and services. They include labor, land, and capital. Now, I must mention at this stage that capital in economics does not mean money as we commonly refer to in our day-to-day language. However, capital means buildings, machines, material, equipment, stuff that firms can use to produce more goods. So as I said, in the circular flow diagram, we'll assume two sectors. The first sector is households. Households own the factors of production, and they can sell or rent them to the firm for income. Now, households also buy the goods and services produced by the firms. Firms, on the other hand, buy or hire the inputs that the households provide them, and they in turn sell the goods and services to the households. Now, armed with these two fundamental actors, we can now understand how goods and services, inputs, and the dollars flow between households and firms. As we said, we'll talk about two markets. The markets for factors of production. This is the market for land, labor, and capital. The other market is the market for goods and services. The green arrow represents the flow of dollars. Dollars flow from households in the form of spending. Households buy goods and services, and this spending becomes the revenue or income of firms. In turn, firms supply households goods and services in the market, and households purchase these goods and services. So as you can see, corresponding to the red arrow, there is a green arrow. The red arrow denotes the flow of material, the goods and services that are tangible. Corresponding to these flow of goods and services is the flow of dollars. Now, households not only buy stuff from the firms, they also sell or rent things to firms. They rent their labor, land, and capital. Firms, on the other hand, are buyers in this market. They buy or rent these resources from firms. In turn, firms pay households wages, rents, and profits. And these wages, rents, and profits become the income of households. So in this very simple model, we can see certain key implications of how households and firms interact with each other. In one market, households act as sellers and firms act as buyers. In the other market, households act as buyers and firms act as sellers. This is a fairly tight model that captures the flow of money and the flow of material between the households and firms. We'll just pause for a second so that you can understand this model and see its implications. The next model that we'll talk about is called the Production's Possibilities Frontier. This is a very important model, and you will see it time and again in this lecture. And if you take advanced international trade, you'll see this prominently featured in that course too. This tool will also help you make some decisions in your personal life, how to allocate your time, how to allocate your resources, and enjoy a better standard of living. The production's possibility frontier is a graph that depicts the various combination of goods a society can produce given its input and given the technology. Consider this graph of PPF. Suppose we have two goods, computers and cars. Given a country's resources, it can decide how much of one or the other good to produce. PPF is this blue graph. Suppose this country denotes or devotes all its resources to the production of computers. It can make 3,000 computers. And let's say it denotes all its resources to the sole production of cars. And it can get 1,000 cars. The points 3,000 and 1,000 are on the PPF. Now it could also decide to produce a combination of cars and computers. The blue line depicts all possible combinations of cars and computers this country can produce, given that it fully utilizes all its resources and uses the best possible technology. Consider point A. At A, this country produces 2,200 computers and 600 cars. Now suppose the country wants to get more cars. The only way it can get more cars or move to a point like B is if it gives up computers. That's because at point A, this country is employing all its workers, is using all its machines and all the resources that it has at its disposal, and is doing it in the best possible way. Now because there is no wastage, the only way you can get more cars is if you move your workers, if you move some equipment, if you move some resources from the production of computers and devote them to the production of cars. Thus this movement from A to B illustrates two key concepts that we talked about in the first chapter: the concept of trade-off and the concept of opportunity cost. To move from A to B, you have to face a choice. The choice is that to get more cars, you have to give up on computers. The opportunity cost of cars, in other words, is the number of computers you give up to get those extra cars. In our example, to get 100 more cars, you're giving up 200 computers. Thus, the opportunity cost of cars at point A is 200 computers. Now consider a point like E or a point like F. Both these points are also efficient because they are on the PPF. These points give us the maximum combination of cars and computers that can be produced by this country, given the best practices in production and employing all its resources. Where the country is may be given by preferences of its people and the government, but all points on the PPF are efficient. Now this model can be applied in your personal life also. Let's say on the y-axis is pursuit of money, and on the x-axis is pursuit of spiritual treasures, things that you have to do as a Christian. Now let's say you're deciding on a career after you graduate from college. If you decide to do the best you can to your abilities, use all your talents, then you would be on a point like on the PPF. If you pursue a career that will make you pursue money at the expense of your family, your friends, your church, your spiritual life, you may be at a point like F, where you'll have a lot of money, but maybe you'll be giving up on some of your things that you value in your personal life. On the other hand, consider point E. At point E, perhaps you're devoting a lot of time volunteering, a lot of time working in the church, a lot of time with friends and family. But you may be giving up on pursuing a career that may get you a higher income. Where you are will depend on your personal preferences. Now, I'm not saying that point F or point E is any more desirable than the other point. Where you are will be based on what you value more. But the key point is that you should always work to the best of your abilities and figure out a career that helps you achieve your life cycle goals. Now consider a point D. Point D is below the PPF. At point D, the country is living below its potential. It is not utilizing its resources, it may not be employing the best technology, and is thus producing less. A point like C is beyond the PPF. Given the current endowment of resources and the current technology, this country cannot achieve a point like C. Why don't you draw this PPF on a sheet of paper, and then we'll be referring to these points in the next couple of slides too. Let's recap what we have learned so far from our model of PPF. The first concept we learned was of efficiency. Efficiency is when the economy is getting the most it can from its scarce resources. Points like A, B, E, and F, which were on the PPF, depict the efficient levels or combinations of cars and computers that this country could produce, given it fully utilizes all its resources and does not waste anything. And not only that, it is employing the best possible technology in the production of these two goods. The second key concept we learned was that of a trade-off. To get more cars, you had to give up on computers. Conversely, to get more computers, you had to give up on cars. In our example, a move from point A to point B resulted in 100 more cars at the expense of 200 computers. Thus, 200 computers was the opportunity cost of getting 100 more cars. The third concept we learned was that of inefficiency. Inefficiency is when the country is wasting or is not able to fully utilize all its resources, or is not employing the best possible technology. Such cases will result in production at a level below the PPF. An example in our case was point D, where this country was not making the most of its resources. We also learned about the opportunity cost concept on the PPF. Opportunity cost is what you have to give up to get more of the other good. The PPF that we saw was concave or bowed out. This bird out shape suggests that the opportunity cost of cars is different at different combinations of the two goods that we're producing. At point E, we're producing a lot of cars and very few computers. The opportunity cost of getting more cars in terms of computers given up is very high at that point. On the other hand, at point F, we were getting a lot of computers and very few cars. If the country wants to produce 100 more cars, it'll give up only a few computers. Now, why may this be the case? In our example, suppose we have two kinds of workers: auto mechanics and hardware engineers. The mechanics are very good at making cars, but not so good in making computers. On the other hand, the engineers may be very good at producing computers, but not so good at making cars. At point E, most workers are now in the auto sector. Only your best engineers are probably still making computers. These engineers are very good at making computers, but they're probably not so good in making cars. Now, when you want to produce even more cars at point E, you have to then ask these best engineers to move from computers to cars. When they do that, the output of computers will fall by a large amount, because these were your best engineers. However, when they make cars, they won't contribute as much in making cars because they are probably terrible at making cars. So you're giving up a lot of computers to get only a few cars. Thus, the opportunity cost of cars at point E, in terms of computers given up, is very high. Try to think of the reason why the opportunity cost of cars is so low when you're at a point like F. One final point about the PPF is that it is not stagnant. It changes over time. The PPF depicts a nation's ability to produce the various combinations of goods and services, given its resources and technology. If you look at the history of US over the past 200 years, we have substantially increased our ability to produce goods and services. In other words, this is concomitant with a shift in the PPF. Why may the PPF shift outwards? The PPF can shift outwards as a result of technological advances. Let's say that this economy discovers a better way of making computers, but nothing happens in the automotive sector. As a result, the PPF will still be at the same point on the auto axis, but will shift out on the computer axis. Let's look at this graphically. This is our old PPF, and now suppose there's a technological breakthrough in production of computers, but the production of cars remains the same. As a result, the economy can still produce 1,000 cars if it devotes all its resources to the production of cars. However, if it devotes all its resources to the production of computers, now it can move up to 4,000 computers. This is given by this outward shift in the PPF. Now look at point G. Before this technological progress, point G was not feasible. It was beyond the old PPF. With advances in technology, a point like G now becomes feasible. At point G, the economy is getting more of both computers and cars. Thus, as nations develop technologically, as they get better at producing goods and services, they can produce more and more goods and services. also when they have increases in input. For instance, when the labor force increases, or when there is more capital, more machines, more resources, then also the PPF will shift out. Summing up, the PPF is a very simple economic model, yet it can give us key insights that can help us understand how nations develop economically, and also it provides us a tool to apply to our personal lives to just keep us accountable and maximizing our talents and abilities. Now, so far we have studied the role of an economist as a scientist. The rest of the chapter in your textbook talks about the economist's role as a policy maker. I'd encourage you to read the rest of the chapter and then based on that answer problems 9 in the problems and answers section. I'll post this also on Moodle as a forum.